Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to, I think this is my fifth book club, and I was really excited about this topic. I recently saw Esther Perel in New York at the Beacon, and I was blown away by her. A friend of mine is a big follower of her, and I'd never read one of her books. So I reached out to my co host, Elizabeth Ashford, who, by the way, Elizabeth is a sex educator. She started Beyond the Beez. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about herself, but really excited about the topic, and I want to welcome Elizabeth. Thanks for coming. And Elizabeth, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the business of sex
Yeah,
education?
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Yes, as Emily said, I'm a certified sex educator, and I started the journey of building Beyond the Bees, which is a sexual education platform that focuses on the biggest sex organ, the brain. And I started building that in 2019, so it's been a couple of years now. And still to this day, one of my favorite educators is Esther Perel. I think she's just amazing and just like there's so much to learn from each one of her books. So I'm really excited to dive into this one. And I also was in some ways worried that if it was an older demographic talking about this book with me, that it wouldn't feel like it was sitting. But I think A, it's never too early to kind of start working on this stuff. And B, I think hopefully the years of education, I can add, interesting parts from other educators into the conversation. And then lastly, I think it's been a surprise to see how much a lot of the things we're going to talk about are already starting in my demographic. Sorry. It's definitely starting, much earlier than I ever would have expected of people kind of letting their sex lives fall away after their long-term relationship. So it's never too early to start.
Yeah. Right. So today, if you tag two of your friends in some of the social media that we've posted, we are going to give out three giveaways. So take a look at your post, send it to two of your friends. That way they'll follow me or Elizabeth back, and then she's going to give out three different things today.
Mhm.
So anyway, let's start just about the key idea. And really, the key idea in her book is the paradox between love and desire. Love being more of a security thing, feeling secure and comfortable, whereas desire needs autonomy, right? So, and I love that because it really gives it sort of a framework for how somebody's sex life can fall apart. So, anyway, questions for you, Elizabeth, about just in general. How do
Yeah.
you explain to clients that safety and desire can pull in opposite directions without making them feel hopeless?
I think the first thing is to realize that they're not enemies of each other, that it's just two different, areas that you're kind of igniting and both can exist, but both can't exist at the same time all the time, and that's totally fine. It's just a reworking of that idea. And I think what people can really pull from this is that the world that we've, been taught around us of how sex works is incorrect. Like I don't think obviously this concept is talked about enough, which is why her work is so fascinating and so worth diving into. But I think the way we talk about sex is just never the full picture. So what you might see here, you'll see a million other ways, a million other times about different things about sex, whether it's language or different activities or the way we even, build what sex even is. It's all kind of needs tweaking. So this is just one of those many ways.
Yeah, yeah. What's a first step for couples to begin cultivating erotic intelligence, in your opinion?
I think for one, obviously, it's the ability to really educate yourself and also to really be able to have conversations about it. It doesn't always have to be with your partner if that feels intimidating, or with friends if that feels intimidating. At least I think having it with yourself and having sort of either journaling or therapy or whatever it may be, because so much of us have grown up around shame and stigma. So in order to kind of get to where you need to get and feeling comfortable with yourself and the world around you, it will take work, unfortunately. And the work really is fun, but I think if it might feel daunting in the beginning because some people get very overwhelmed by the topic, or it can be very linked to trauma, and that can be really difficult. But it's sort of pushing yourself out of that comfort zone and then moving into that next phase, which is interesting, dynamic, fun, exciting, all those things.
Yeah, and she really touches on that whole, we'll get into the sort of the family aspect of it, but she touches on a lot in this book about how your childhood really has a lot to do with your intimate relationships with others. So I really loved that part of the book. Just talking about chapter one, from adventure to captivity. Romance begins with novelty and risk. But once a relationship becomes a secure home, the adventure that once fueled desire often fades. So
Mhm.
that's really the key topic here. The very stable couples can endure life for a long time, but they need eroticism to continue a great sex life. So anyway, she talks about Lena and Mark and how they met traveling and had the thrill of the unknown. And then all of a sudden they buy a house, they get married, they have kids, their lives become highly scheduled. And Mark admits he loves the security but misses the edge. And I mean, that's probably a common topic for a lot of couples, right?
Mhm.
So, in your estimation, how can couples nurture the sense of adventure without sacrificing that safety and security that they feel
Mhm.
with marriage?
It's interesting. I was thinking of things I highlighted from her, and one was that excitement was bound to a certain measure of insecurity, and that eroticism thrives on unpredictability. And obviously, both of those are good. But I don't want people to take it too far because when you think about the dynamics of a toxic relationship where sex is usually like flowing and very, that's kind of the most active ingredient of that relationship. That's not necessarily healthy either, and it's toxic, obviously, but it's not necessarily orgasmic. So the pleasure aspect of it is not as fulfilling as what you might get from this safety, but kind of duller at times in terms of desired dynamic. So just don't idealize what the opposite could be because they bring different things, and you definitely would probably prefer safety and desire. But I think in terms of nurturing it, I don't want to go too far into this because we'll go into it later in the chapter, but I definitely like the idea of the concept of the third, or in other words, kind of not over monitoring like your partner's brain. And we'll go into that with fantasy and with porn and all of that, and kind of making sure that, the agreement is monogamy, but allowing for a sense of fantasy and exploration mentally to happen, I think is a really nice way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and she really talks a lot about some of the qualities that you have to really continue having a great erotic sex life, and that's being creative and being
Yeah.
curious and all these
Yeah.
aspects that you need of yourself, and you've got to pull out of the stable environment, so to speak, to really conjure that up and think about when you were young and like how you felt and why we lose that because we get into this doldrum of life. So anyway, the second chapter talks about more intimacy and less sex. And the synopsis really is: love seeks closeness and sharing, but desire thrives on distance and otherness. Too much merging can stifle erotic change. And she uses an example with John and Beatrice, and they're best friends and constant companions. They have a strong emotional bond, yet their sex life has dwindled. Um, she guides them to spend intentional time apart and rediscover each other as separate, intriguing individuals. So, I guess in therapy, some people are like, "What, you want us to spend less time together?" They don't get that. It's sort of weird, but it did work for them. So,
Mhm.
why can emotional oversharing sometimes dampen sexual desire, in your opinion?
Mm. Sometimes, and one thing I find very funny with friends too is sometimes that oversharing can be very like unsexy, but you obviously want the closeness. But I remember even just yesterday I was with friends and a lot of them were kind of joking about how much they're like, this isn't exactly oversharing, like, or physical sharing, but it's like, going to the bathroom like right in front of them, like going number two or whatever it may be. And there's moments like that that might take it too much into sibling relations rather than, I just think there's little moments here or there where you can remind yourself that it's like a partner that you were excited about and try to create some certain boundaries. You don't want too many, obviously, because that closeness is what a lot of people are looking for, but there are moments where I do think it's worth it. And at the same time, finding those can be really tricky because I actually highlighted one of my favorite parts of this chapter was when there was that couple that they cuddle a lot. And Esther Perel said, "Well, that's got to stop." And she was saying that she's trying to differentiate between the two and get the physical closeness to kind of separate itself so they can remember that they're two people. And that's something that I actually wouldn't have really ever thought to tell someone. So it can be hard to figure out what it is exactly for you. But I think just just reminding yourself those little boundaries, those little moments, because something that you were saying from the last question that got me thinking was when you're in a new relationship, we often do so much to prepare for like the dates and everything is kind of foreplay. We're doing a lot for the other person. There's a lot of like acknowledgement of their energy in the space, and then that all kind of goes away. And it's the way that we talk, it's the way that we act, all those things. So it's trying to remember some of those moments from the beginning and kind of bring them back in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's crazy how you can just get so dull. Okay, so why might eroticism thrive on dynamics that differ from daily equality?
Mm. I mean, I think it's obviously the habitual nature can get really boring to people, and the day in and day out, like the stress levels of this generation or just this, group of people in general, it's exhausting. I think there's so much that we're dealing with, especially politically right now and just environmentally, like it just doesn't end. So it's kind of trying to find a way to take that out so you can feel the desire creep back in. And that, people get so sick of hearing like meditation and workout and all these things. But whatever is a de-stressor to you that's like healthy is something that is very worth leaning into to kind of get out of those daily moments and bring some of the excitement back in because, as we get older, I feel like those lists get longer and longer, especially once kids are in the mix. And obviously we'll talk about that. But it's sort of just trying to get out of that bogged down nature.
Yeah. And don't forget what oxytocin feels like and that dopamine, that happy thing that happens with sex. Okay, so getting to three.
Mhm.
No, are we on two? No, we're on three. The pitfalls of modern intimacy. Today, we equate intimacy with endless verbal disclosure, but erotic closeness often grows through action, touch, and mystery, not just talk. And she uses I remember this example. She's talking about Eddie and Noriko.
Mm.
And they fell in love, and she didn't speak English, and how they had little innuendos. And you know, I do think that you have to have your own language with someone other than just talking through stuff. So, really, how do you help clients feel less pressured to talk everything out and rediscover nonverbal intimacy? How would you talk to someone about
This one made me think of a very specific experience I had. I did this program called Hoffman, where it's kind of like this 1 week intensive therapy experience, and it's really amazing. And there's a bunch of different activities we're doing through the whole thing. And there was one activity where they were telling us what we were doing, and I was like internally having a freak out. You had to go find someone in the group, put their hand here, your hand on their chest, lock eyes, and sync breath. And I was like, if I get a man, I'm gonna die. So I ran, grabbed a girl, we did it. It's like a 2 minute eye gazing breath work connection thing. And it was so funny because I remember some of the women who had done it with men and who were heterosexual, like were kind of joking, like, I feel like I just cheated on my husband. Like it just felt really intense. And it did. Like it just felt like
it?
very, very intimate. And it
Yeah.
really reminded me, and it was short too. It was 2 minutes. It was very short. You could do it for 1 minute. It just reminded me of like the power of those moments and how much they really do have an impact. And it's so hard to slow down in our day-to-day life. But it's interesting to think about kind of integrating those 1 or 2 minute practices, like where you can, whether it's that or meditation or taking in someone else's sort of like erotic work. Oh, sorry. Or co-meditation. There's a lot of options, but it's interesting that it is effective.
Yes. Yeah. Um, what role can silence or ritual play in sustaining erotic energy?
Silence or
Silence.
ritual? Well, I think rituals that I think we really need to start learning or leaning more into rituals that benefit both people. We live in this world that's, especially for heterosexual couples, it's just such a challenge. The North American sex script is what a lot of people have coined the sex we're seeing now, which is just penis and a vagina until a man finishes, and then we wonder why the woman gets bored. So it's sort of about finding a ritual that both people enjoy, and that can be really just feel out of the norm given how much we're inundated with penis and a vagina till a man finishes. So that could be more foreplay, that could be more sort of, erotic dialogue, that could be more, it could really be anything that makes you both feel that sense of sensuality together.
Yeah, I often wonder if Bridgerton, when that one scene on the staircase, it caused a lot of women to watch that show
Did
because
it?
they lack that. Yes.
I didn't see
Um,
it. Oh my God.
oh yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, it's great. Okay. Democracy versus hot sex. Okay.
Mhm.
The synopsis is egalitarian relationships value equality and fairness. Yet erotic desire often plays with power, asymmetry, and fantasy.
Mhm.
So when they talk about Rachel and Ben, they share housework and decisions equally, but Rachel secretly longs for playful dominance in the bedroom. And Esther shows them that consensual power dynamics can coexist with daytime equality. So, how can couples safely explore power play while maintaining mutual respect?
Okay, so this is a hard one to fully dive into because chapter 9, I have a little thing we're going to look at for a little spreadsheet on sexual fantasies. And this is one of the topics that we'll cover. But I think one of the best ways to understand it is that, you know, fantasy is not politically correct. Like, I think we're all doing a lot right now and fighting a lot of very non-PC things that are just the world around us is very frustrating and very, I think, with a lot of, empowerment that has to go into your day-to-day life to fight it. But the bedroom, as long as you're like agreeing on what's being experienced, it doesn't have to be PC. And that's sort of one area that I think people kind of forget that it's okay. As long as there's like consent in it and a strong, discussion about it before. But a lot of the people, especially, and we'll go into this, because even politically, like Democrats versus Republicans have different fantasies, and it depends a lot on a form of reactance. So if you're being told you need to be this way all the time, it will often show up the opposite way in the bedroom. And that's totally normal. So I think it's just normalizing that difference.
Yeah, yeah. Um, let's go to chapter 5, can
Mhm.
do. Okay. The Protestant work ethic prizes productivity and self-control. So
Mhm.
that's our world. Okay. Qualities that can suffocate pleasure and spontaneity in sex. Karen and Luke run a busy household with color coded calendars. Okay, come on. Sex
Mhm.
becomes another task. Esther Perel encourages them to trade efficiency for play, scheduling less and savoring more. So that was her sort of her example. So let me ask you a couple of questions about this chapter.
Yeah.
What cultural attitudes about productivity interfere most with erotic life?
I think obviously we really reward productivity. Like I know I do it on my own life. Like, oh, like I worked so hard, you work so much, and that really feels, especially as women, because I think we've lived in a world that's very male dominated in their working life, and there's a lot of like catch up that we're playing, which is not good for our sex lives. But it's just very important to always remember that the brain is the biggest sex organ and stress is the biggest sex killer through and through. So having all these lists, all these things, it's really difficult to not have them because I still have mine. I still am like trying to figure out like how to get through every day with all the things that we're all doing. I don't even have kids, so I can't even really imagine. So I kind of was struggling in parts of the chapter with that because it's hard to just say, schedule less and have more fun. And it's just, I just think it's a really hard thing to do. But the things that you could do, what we kind of talked about before, were just injecting those like very small moments can be really beneficial, or finding moments where you're really only focusing on yourself. Like there's that sense of otherness and what can sometimes be considered as selfishness actually are very valuable to the dynamic between two partners. There needs to be otherness outside of like the household. So that might be adding one more thing to your list, but maybe if it's for you, it will be charging your battery instead of draining it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Erotic blueprints is chapter 7. Our
Hmm.
childhood experiences of love, how we were held, soothed, or desired, shape how we seek pleasure and connection as adults.
Hmm.
Sophia grew up with an unpredictable affection and now craves intensity and dramatic gestures in sex. Recognizing this pattern allows her and her partner to meet her needs more consciously. I think
Hmm.
in this chapter there was someone else that they were talking about a guy that was had problems with intimacy. It might have been another chapter, but I mean, it just sort of reminded me of this. Is when he had problems with intimacy, when he got too intimate with a partner, he would back off because his mother and father were divorced, and his mother clung to him.
Hmm.
So to him, being intimate and connected to someone was almost like clingy. And
Hmm.
um, so I thought that was interesting. But just asking you a couple of questions about this,
Hmm.
how do you how does early attachment styles show up in adult sexual preferences? And that's one of them, that I just mentioned.
I think it's like everywhere. And if anyone wanted to do a second book, Amy Scatlett, there's a book called Not Under My Roof, and it's so interesting and it really showcases the difference, specifically in the US. We have such a big problem with, how our culture works with sex and how we talk about it. And she compares us to the Netherlands, and they're like historically pretty amazing, especially in comparison to us. And the big differences are normalization versus dramatization. We obviously are dramatizing it, they're normalizing it. And even the way they kind of do ads and the way their parents talk about it. And their like birth rates are way down, their STD rates are down. The adolescents have sex, I think like on average 2 years later than, US kids do. And one of the main questions was, would you let your like teen have a sleepover with their partner under your roof? And in the Netherlands, it's almost always yes, and here it's obviously almost always no. So it's interesting how much they're able to kind of create, you know, a working dynamic as a parent and child by having open conversations. And here there is so much damage done by the way we talk about it and the way we shame it and the way we don't allow it. So it's a hard one because it's everywhere. And I think, like we were kind of saying before, shame like really gets its power from being unspeakable. So you have to start like therapy, couples therapy, because these things won't just work their way out on their own, especially if someone like that is like you were describing is pulling away every time someone gets close. That's just very self-sabotagey and does require like legitimate work, which
Yeah.
is unfortunate, but it's sort of just the world that we live in.
Your childhood too, and my generation, really, our parents never talked to us about sex ever.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that's a good thing. And I have boys, so it really did happen for me, but I mean, I think mother to mother, I think you're seeing more of that. I don't
Hmm.
have a daughter, but you know um okay, parenthood, let's go into that. When a child enters the family, this is chapter 9.
Hmm.
The couple's erotic bond is easily eclipsed. Maintaining desire requires conscious effort and protected couple space. So Lisa and Greg love their newborn, but feel like co-managers than lovers.
Hmm.
And so Esther Perel helps them carve out private rituals, date nights, adult conversations to keep eroticism alive. So that makes sense, right? What are the most effective micro practices for parents to sustain intimacy? I've always often think date night probably, but there might be other strategies. What are your
I
thoughts?
think in general, number one is definitely like the awareness and the preparation for it to dip. Because I think we have like a huge problem, and maybe I'm just like very much seeing it right now because this is the people around me like running to get married, running to have babies. And it's very interesting with how much like yes, those are great things, but they absolutely come with side effects such as, the sexlessness or, marriage isn't statistically the most successful thing on the face of the planet. So you just have to wonder why it's at like the tippy top of people's lists. And if it is going to be at the top of your list, at least be prepared for the changes that come with those choices. So I think the awareness and the preparation. And then in terms of exactly what she was saying in the book, I really liked her definition or her idea of she said a lot of men find it difficult to eroticize the mother of their child. It feels too regressive and too incestuous. And then she said for someone who was trying to flip it, for one example, one woman was forcing him, the idea was pay the mother of your kids for sex, and taking yourself out of the mother role and demanding money for sex puts you literally in a different
I
role
remember that
as
one.
like a
Yes,
sex worker.
but it
And
worked.
it totally worked. And
I
I think
know.
that's such a good one because it
Yeah, it
doesn't
was
have to
great.
be working for everyone. And that's
Yeah.
what's hard about this stuff. Sometimes it really does. You take like a sex therapist to walk specifically into what works for you because someone might see that and be like, that's horrible. And then someone else might see it and be like, that's my missing piece.
Yeah.
So I just think that one was very fun because it takes that level of creativity and that's fine.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, a flesh and fantasy, and this is where you're going to share the screen. But let me just give you the synopsis and the
Oh.
story from it that I remember. Fantasy offers a direct route to pleasure, imagination, not just physical acts, fuels erotic life. And so that gets into the curiosity and the creativity. Carla enjoys elaborate fantasies she never intends to enact. Sharing select fantasies with her partner reignites their sexual chemistry.
Mm,
So, how can couples talk about fantasies without fear of judgment?
mm. So I love this section because I think acknowledgement of what you're asking for makes it so much easier because people may have XYZ fantasy and we'll look at them and they think they're so crazy and scary, but the emotional reason behind it is always so simple and so not embarrassing or scary. So hold on, let me pull this up. Share. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
How do hold on, I went to, oh, there we go. Share. Okay. So there's seven key groups of fantasies that people experience. So we're just going to go over all seven and the emotional capacity, the underlying desire for each one. So group sex, multiple partners, obviously to get lost in sensation. So most of the time people are at the center of attention. They're usually like the center person and two people are around them or however many people for the sake of the sensations they're going to experience. So you really are just asking for a lot of attention or action, towards you and pleasure. And that's totally fine and normal. And there's ways to find that without doing this if your partner's not interested in it, which I think is helpful. Adults are more likely to have this particular fantasy than teenagers. We kind of get it wrong in media. We're always showing that teens and college kids are having threesomes, and it's really not them, it's adults, because it's usually too new for younger generations. So the next one is control and rough sex. So I really like this one because people get very judgy about this specific one. But it's a strong physical sensation, such as pain, can bring someone into the present moment. And the sharp contrast of pain to pleasure can make the latter feel that much better. And a really good example of this is hot chocolate and drinking hot chocolate after you've been in the bitter cold versus drinking hot chocolate, if we were just sitting here right now drinking it. It's so much more pleasurable after you've been in the cold. And that's just a very small example of what someone's feeling or looking for. So, mental presence. And again, once you know exactly what you're kind of honing in on, you can find other ways to do it if your partner is not interested in whatever you're kind of presenting. So then three, novelty and variety. A lot of people walk this back to the Coolidge effect, where this occurs when someone seeks out a new partner or experience once they think the job of fertilization is complete. That's sort of more of an evolutionary take, which I agree with, but I don't think it's the top tier. This category involves exploring new experiences and variety of familiar ones. And this one's normal because if you are getting married and you are in a monogamous relationship, that is a long time to be with one person. And like what we've seen, the ritual and habitual nature of sex can really be a problem. So this sort of takes it out of that problem figure, that this fantasy, and takes you somewhere totally different. Oh, I liked this. One common novelty fantasy for heterosexual men is to be pegged by their female partners. That one's very, very common. I just think that's interesting because that one's definitely taboo. So this is likely because there's a lot of pleasure receptors in the male prostate. We kind of have gotten anal wrong. It's very normal for a woman to be the one experiencing anal penetration, but men are the ones that can orgasm from it, not women. Or women can, but it's not as likely. Number four, taboo, forbidden sex. This one I think is very interesting. We kind of touched on reactance before. You're exercising your freedom or whatever you're being told not to do. You kind of have an interest in doing. It depends on your personality, but that's definitely heavily a part of this. So religiously affiliated individuals are commonly experiencing this. So this type of fantasy, it can depend on what religion you're subscribing to, but it's a big part of it. And then political affiliation. So Democrats who are in line with equality are more likely to fantasize about dominance, submission. Democrats are, more devoted to religion and monogamy, are more likely to fantasize about infidelity. So I just thought that was so interesting because I hadn't heard about that before.
Oh, that is.
Last three. So swinging partner polyamory. Again, kind of can go into variety, but variety and adds more kind of curiosity and dimension into the experience, which a lot of people are missing. Some people like the idea of different partners fulfilling different sexual needs or emotional needs. Cuckolding is a very big one, or giving someone else the power over your partner while you watch. That's a very common one. Passion and romance, it's often filling a void. The fantasy is typically about significant other or long-term partner and is often envisioned as an expression of a deep emotional connection. So that can be just really linking to some type of loneliness or not feeling connected to your partner. Or it can go back into forms of shame and like adolescence, because some of these can be really heavily connected to what we were talking about before with how you grew up. And the last one's erotic flexibility. So, two examples, homoeroticism and gender bending. This might hint at a person's underlying desire when it comes to their sexual or gender identity, kind of switching your gender, and this will explain it a bit more. So, if a woman finds herself sexually stimulated when she thinks of herself as a man, this can come from sub emotions such as feeling sexual gratification from the type of power men experience in this misogynistic world. So, you can imagine yourself living life as if you're that person, and it can really turn people on. It's again, the brain is the biggest sex organ, which is why we can't undersell the importance of tending to it. And then the last section, which I can't really even see, men are more likely to think about gender bending, and women are more likely to think about bending sexual orientation through and through. So, so sorry. Last two little sections on this. Are fantasies tied to shame? This is a very big thing that people talk about in this space because it's kind of goes back and forth of how much. Some people believe every single one is linked to shame. I don't really subscribe to that one. I think it kind of depends on what's on in your day-to-day life. So for one, am I lovable? For example, if you feel you're unloved, your fantasy might consist of and fall in that passion romance category. Physical appearance. If you're frequently changing your physical appearance in fantasy, it might indicate subconscious insecurities in your body. So I just see that more than always about childhood. Oh, changing in oneself is also linked to being imaginative and a sensation seeker. So there's no clear line. Again, it's very personal, but it's just helpful to know how normal it is. And the last thing is, can you change your fantasy? So always alter and replace, but don't suppress. And that's what's helpful about kind of figuring out the meaning behind these. So, map out your desire and ask yourself what you need and what you're trying to fulfill. Is there something unhealed that you're looking for? And then neuroplasticity can be a really helpful method to understand how to shift these. The more we're using certain brain paths, the more they're going to grow and strengthen. So if you really want to change something, again, don't suppress it, but you can think, okay, I want more mental presence. What's another way to do it? And then you flip into that one. And then again, for replacing, willpower is a muscle. So if we overuse it, it will crash out. So it's good to just avoid that at all costs. So that's my little quick overview on this
That's
one.
great. I love that. Thank you. That was terrific. Um, all right, I'm going to move on to the shadow of the third. Okay, because I love this. The third is about fantasizing about another person or thing or whatever. And my third just died. Robert Redford. He was my So I'm very upset. And Sam Shepard was another one. So I've got to find a third. No, I'm sure there's some hot young men I can think about. Anyway, it's acknowledging it, that
Yeah.
they exist. That's what this chapter talks about, and it reveals hidden desires and revitalizes a relationship. So she talks about Martin admits to a flirtation that jolts his wife Isabel into reevaluating their erotic life. And she helps them use the revelation to reignite passion rather than destroy the trust. So,
Mhm.
because there are a lot of people, everyone has fantasies, and they also have someone else that they think is hot or cute or whatever, but they're not going to act upon it. So, but it does spur eroticism.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, how can you recognize the presence of a third strengthen rather than threaten a couple?
Mm. I feel like this is one on like TikTok and Instagram that I see all the time of people still very strongly believing like your partner, specifically women with men, like the men cannot be watching porn. It's so bad. I just very much disagree with it because obviously, again, as we've learned, the brain is the biggest sex organ. It's not as obedient as we would like it to be. And for example, obviously the fantasy world, we really can learn how much it's the reactance or whatever it may be that's creating different desires. And a lot of the fantasies or experiences that we're having or the porn we're watching isn't something you really always want in reality. Like one very common fantasy for a woman is a rape fantasy, which I think is very interesting given how much we are fighting against, sexual assault right now. But a lot of the times for a woman, it's the idea of it is that you're like relinquishing all control and you're just experiencing things and kind of in complete and total relaxation is where that fantasy can stem from. Obviously they wouldn't want that in real life. So I think you don't really know what your partner's watching or what they're thinking about, but you telling them not to do this, not to do this, that girl's not hot. I can't believe you think that person's attractive, isn't doing anything. It has no form of actual control. So you can kind of like we were talking about with Amy Scatlett, you can maintain control through connection and conversation and acknowledgement that just because someone else is beautiful or he finds someone else attractive doesn't take away from what you have together at all. So I think it's just the comfortability with it, the fact that it's happening with everyone, it's not even personal.
And setting up boundaries on that
And
too.
setting up, yeah, I think specificity isn't helpful. Like I think if they came home and they were like, I think my coworker is so hot, then that obviously would ignite like stress every time they go to the office. So it doesn't have to be something specific in the real world unless it's sort of like a passing character. But yeah, I think it definitely the language that you use is will be important.
Yeah. Okay, fine. The final chapter is gathers all the lessons. It talks about erotic vitality depends on curiosity, play, autonomy, and a willingness to keep mystery alive even at home. Okay. And she shares composites of couples who reclaimed eroticism by introducing novelty, surprise dates, playful rituals, daring conversations, and treating desire as an ongoing practice.
Mhm.
So, Elizabeth, what is one accessible habit you recommend to couples to keep the X factor alive?
It definitely depends on the couple, but since it's women here, like my first thought is always to remind women that they're like sexual beings. I just think the world around us consistently tries to tell us that men are more sexual, and it's just so factually incorrect. And like we kind of touched on before, the North American sex script, the sex that we're having, more often than not is built for a man. Like even the words that we use, like vagina versus vulva. Vagina is just the vaginal canal where the penis goes. The vulva is everything, the clitoris, every other part, which are all erotic, places to engage with. Like foreplay is foreplay, as many people say. So I think it's just rewriting that script and making sure that the sex you're having is what like you have interest in. Because a lot of the times, like, is it worth having? Because if it's not, you'll start to see that desire slip no matter what you do. So it's kind of just remembering that and remembering too that in the early days of dating, we're always thinking about how spontaneous it was and how amazing that kind of spontaneity was. But most people will move into responsive desire where, the eroticism or the arousal builds and then the desire comes. So sometimes you just have to put yourself in an experience to feel the arousal first and then the desire will come. And just this, the script had flipped and that's just sort of the new, reality, but it doesn't have to be about a reality. It just has to be something that you're, focused on.
How can partners sustain curiosity over decades together? How do they?
I think one is definitely embracing the ups and downs. Like people kind of forget that it's inevitable. Like bad sex or going down and not really feeling anything and the spark going away is inevitable for every single couple. And it's also something that you can change. So that awareness is, I think, really helpful that it's A, not just you, B, something you can prepare for if you know certain changes are coming, and C, something you can always fix. So that's one. Two is sort of removing the goal-oriented nature of everything. It doesn't always have to be about an orgasm. And there's often kind of like we were saying with the lists and the time, we don't always have the time. So how can you link those moments in, even if they're small? And
Yeah,
then the last one, like we were just kind of saying, is that sense of creativity to make sure you've personalized the sex you have all the time to yourself and not to the society in the way that they've told you to have it.
right, right. Well, this has been great. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to go off record because this is a touchy subject and I want to open it up for questions. I do have questions for the participants, but I'm going to go off record and I'm just going to say thank you. We're going to use this video for other things. So, thank you, Elizabeth. This has been a great conversation and I'm going to go off record now and we will open it up for